Bryan Kohberger slaughtering 4 University of Idaho students.
Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to serve 4 life sentences without parole for those 4 stabbing deaths. Today in court for the very first time.
This has been a really, really big day in the true crime community. You probably know today as the sentencing day.
Keep the spotlight on the case of the Idaho Four student murders, as tomorrow Bryan Kohberger is going to receive his sentence.
In the small town of Moscow, Idaho, the morning of November 13, 2022, began as usual. It was quiet and cold, and a thin layer of fog was rising over the campus of the University of Idaho. Everything appeared familiar, frozen in routine until, at 11:58 a.m., a call came into 911 from the residents at 1122 King Road. The caller spoke of an unconscious man. What the police discovered upon arrival defied simple description. The house where the students lived was typical for the area, with its slightly peeling walls, an old staircase, and a history of rowdy parties. Nothing set it apart until that night, when one of the most resonant and chilling crimes in modern American history unfolded within its walls. 4 young people were found dead, all murdered with a knife. There were no signs of forced entry. There were no witnesses. The victims were Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, best friends, inseparable since childhood, sharing a room on the upper floor. A floor below, Ethan Chapin and his girlfriend Xander Chapnodal were discovered. Ethan had been a guest at her place that night. 2 other roommates survived. One of them, as would later be revealed, had left her room in the middle of the night and caught a glimpse of a masked man heading toward the exit. At that moment, she did not grasp the full magnitude of what was happening. She locked herself in, and the police were not called until the morning, after the bodies were discovered. Forensic experts later determined that the murders occurred between 4:00 and 4:25 a.m. Every blow was delivered with a large, sharp knife. The perpetrator acted quickly and silent almost, with a professional detachment. Not a single cry was heard. No one had the chance to escape. The investigators concluded that this was a deliberate, methodically executed murder, not a spontaneous outburst of rage or a tragic accident. The town, the university, and the entire country were shaken. Social media exploded with photos of the victims, TikTok videos, and countless Instagram reposts. People searched for answers, while the police concentrated on finding the killer. For the first few weeks, there was almost nothing to go on: no murder weapon, no fingerprints, no obvious motive. News headlines changed one after another. Invisible killer, blood in the silence, nightmare in Idaho. The police found themselves under unprecedented pressure. There were no clear suspects. Theories multiplied: an unknown stranger, a jilted ex-boyfriend, an unstable fanatic. The victims' parents could hardly wait. They launched their own campaigns, made appeals, and spoke out publicly. The family of Kaylee Goncalves was particularly vocal. Her father, in a display witnessed nationwide, demanded justice with a fiery passion. Yet the real turning point would come only a month and a half later. While the public speculated, the police worked in silence. Dozens of surveillance videos were gathered, cell tower data was analyzed, and behavioral profiles were scrutinized. On December 29, 2022, in Pennsylvania, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger, graduate student of criminology at Washington State University, was arrested at his parents' home in the middle of the night. Until that day, his name had been unknown to the public. None of the victims had been personally acquainted with him. However, the details uncovered after his arrest sent shivers down the spines of even the most unflappable observers. Bryan had been enrolled in a program focused on criminal behavior. He studied serial killers, authored academic papers on the psychology of violence, and engaged in online discussions and forum debates about how emotions influence the choice of a victim. Moreover, shortly before the murders, he had posted a poll on Reddit asking ex-convicts how they had felt at the moment of committing a crime. The purpose behind his collection of this information became tragically clear too late. The investigation revealed that his vehicle, a Hyundai Elantra, had been recorded near the victim's house on the night of the murders. According to mobile operator data, his phone had been turned off during specific intervals that coincided with the time of the attack. Additionally, DNA evidence matching that found on the knife sheath left at the crime scene was discovered in the trash collected near his parents' home. Though Kohberger maintained his innocence, and his attorneys argued that the evidence was inconclusive, coincidental, or even planted, the mounting evidence told a different story. His digital footprints, his behavior after the crime, and his attempts to conceal his movements all pointed to one conclusion: he had planned it. He had observed his targets, chosen the moment, and knew exactly how to avoid leaving traces. The trial lasted over a year, both sides prepared as if they were gearing up for war. The prosecution built its case on incriminating evidence and clear motives. The defense, however, played on the uncertainties, raising questions about investigative errors and media pressure. The victim's parents sat silently in the courtroom, while reporters relayed every emotion, every word, day after day. In June 2024, after months of preparation, Bryan Kohberger stood trial. The hearings lasted for weeks. The testimonies of eyewitnesses, forensic experts, and digital data analysts combined into a macabre mosaic. And by July 2025, it became clear that the prosecutors would be seeking the death penalty. The story, which had begun in the silent pre-dawn hours of Idaho, had culminated in a courtroom filled with cameras, tears, and palpable tension. Questions still lingered. Why had he done it? Why choose these particular people? Why with such cold precision? But one truth was indisputable. Evil can wear any face, even that of one who studies crimes in a supposed bid to understand them. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen had been inseparable since the 6th grade. Their friendship had weathered adolescent crises, proms, first loves, and moves. They were like sisters, sharing clothes, secrets, and dreams. Madison was calm and thoughtful, with a slight huskiness in her voice, while Kaylee was vivacious, loud, and charismatic. Both were students at the University of Idaho Madison studying marketing, and Kaylee, criminology, an ironic twist in hindsight.
Just her laughter. Her sense of humor was amazing. She was very funny. I miss her smile.
Xander Chapnodal was relatively new to the shared house, but quickly became friends with her roommates. Coming from a modest background, she was studying design, working part-time, and dreaming of moving to a big city. Ethan Chapin, her boyfriend, was her complete opposite. All fair, from a large family, kind-hearted, and naively confident that everything would work out. He was a student in the athletic department, played volleyball, and even competed for the university team. On the evening of November 12th, everything felt routine. Each couple had their own plans. Kaylee and Madison headed out to the corner club bar. They sat at the counter, laughing, posting stories to social media. Around 1:30 a.m., they left the bar and walked over to a nearby food truck, chatting with other students as they grabbed some snacks. A security camera captured them. They appeared intoxicated, but happy. At 1:56 a.m., they got into a car called through a university-sponsored ride service, essentially a free student shuttle to ensure safe rides home. The driver later confirmed that nothing seemed off in their behavior. Ethan and Zana had spent the evening at a party at a neighboring house. They left shortly before 2 a.m. The house they all lived in had 3 levels. Ethan and Zana stayed on the 2nd floor, while Madison and Kaylee had rooms on the 3rd. In the basement lived 2 other girls who, by some unthinkable twist of fate, survived that night. The night was quiet. The town slept. On King Road, there was no traffic, no noise. At 3:26 a.m., surveillance footage recorded a white Hyundai Elantra slowly driving past the house. It circled the neighborhood repeatedly, as if the driver were scouting something. At 4:04, the car appeared again and then vanished. From that point on, there was silence. Investigators later determined the murders began around 4:00 a.m. Xana and Ethan were attacked first, then Madison and Kaylee. All victims were killed in their sleep or within moments of waking. The autopsy revealed that only one victim, Ethan, put up a fight. The others had no chance to defend themselves. The attack was swift and deliberate. One of the girls had a second knife wound inflicted after she had already died, suggesting the killer was in control, unhurried, and knew exactly what he was doing. On the knife sheath found near Madison's body, a DNA trace was discovered. At the time, no one knew who it belonged to, but that tiny detail would later become a turning point in the investigation. Around 4:20 a.m., a nearby security camera picked up the sound of tires screeching, presumably the Hyundai Elantra speeding away. Later, another camera recorded a white sedan traveling southbound on Highway 95 at 4:48 a.m., headed toward Pullman, Washington, the town where Washington State University is located. That's where Bryan Kohberger returned home. His phone turned back on roughly 30 minutes after the murders, and he resumed using it like nothing had happened. The next morning arrived with no suspicion. The two surviving roommates woke up late. One of them left her room and saw her friend unresponsive but assumed she had simply passed out. She called some friends. They arrived and tried to revive the victim. It wasn't until someone went upstairs that they screamed in horror. The 911 call wasn't placed until 11:58 a.m. That delay sparked endless theories and speculation, but the investigation later confirmed the girls were in shock. They had no grasp of what had actually happened. Police arrived within minutes. What they found inside the house defied description. Photos from the scene have never been released, but investigators' reactions said enough, it was a massacre, executed with chilling precision. In the early days, the investigation stalled. Ex-partners, acquaintances, and classmates came under suspicion. Dozens of students were interviewed. Every lead was scrutinized. Victims' families demanded answers. Journalists offered their own theories, but the detectives dug deeper into the invisible world of digital breadcrumbs, where truth hides in signals and data. Cameras, cell phone pings, vehicle movements. Piece by piece, a complex mosaic took shape. The white Hyundai Elantra became a ghost-to-shadow vehicle hunted across the country. Eventually, it was discovered the car was registered to Bryan Kohberger. He lived just 15 minutes from the crime scene, was a criminology PhD student, and taught undergraduate courses in criminal justice. His appearance drew no attention. His behavior was odd, reclusive. He was articulate in theory, yet distant in daily life, and he knew how investigations worked. But he didn't know he had left a microscopic trace on the knife sheath. Didn't know a neighbor's camera had captured his car. Didn't know that even though he'd turned his phone off, its absence left a trail on nearby towers. Most importantly, he didn't know the police were already watching, waiting, ready to strike. The arrest. On the morning of December 29, 2022, there was a knock at the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania. Bryan was arrested without resistance. Inside, investigators found gloves, tools, and trash bags. In his car, they discovered evidence matching a departure from the crime scene. His phone history became a map of guilt, and his silences spoke louder than a confession. In the weeks following the murders, fear gripped the town. The university emptied out, students fled, classes were canceled. No one knew who the killer was or why he was still free. The police remained silent not because they knew too little, but because they feared revealing too much. One wrong move could alert the man they already sensed was lurking in the shadows. The key was the car, a white Hyundai Elantra without front license plates. It was captured on video multiple times during the early hours of November 13, moving, strangely circling, pausing, disappearing, reappearing. This wasn't a lost driver. This was a watcher, a predator. On December 7, police publicly released information about the car. They asked anyone with information to come forward. By that point, they'd narrowed the search to more than 20 registered vehicles. It seemed impossible, but digital data began painting a clearer picture. In Pullman, Washington, a graduate student named Bryan Kohberger owned a white Hyundai Elantra that matched the make and model. His phone history revealed erratic routes, night drives, signal dropouts, visits to unfamiliar areas. His phone had pinged near King Road 2 months before the murder, and at least 12 more times after that. Sometimes in the middle of the night, police began surveillance. He was careful, methodical, almost paranoid. He wore gloves to take out the trash. He didn't tell anyone he was going to Pennsylvania with his father for the holidays. On their 500-mile road trip, they were pulled over twice. Each time, Bryan appeared nervous, unnatural.
Pennsylvania, when you're stuck in the intersection, you have to make the left. So what would the appropriate thing for me to...
The officers had no idea they were face to face with the man the entire country was hunting. Surveillance continued through December. The breakthrough came from trash collected at the Kohberger family home in Albrightsville. FBI analysts extracted DNA that matched the trace found on the knife sheath. The odds it belonged to anyone else from the same male lineage? Less than 1 in 100 million. It was enough. The arrest operation was launched early on December 29. The house was silent. Kohberger didn't resist. He didn't speak. He simply stared. According to the officers present, his eyes were filled with something indescribable, not fear, not surprise, but recognition, as if he'd always known it would end this way. Trial and aftermath. After the arrest, a new battle began, both public and legal. Kohberger was extradited to Idaho. At his first hearing, he pleaded not guilty. His face quickly became the symbol of terror in the media. The public was split. Some demanded the death penalty. Others urged against a rush to judgment. But investigators continued to dig. His phone revealed disturbing crime scene details, surveillance cameras, court timelines, methods for concealing evidence. He had joined online forums dedicated to serial killers, studied Ted Bundy. On his laptop, an academic paper about motivated desensitization, a psychological theory describing how intellectual reasoning can suppress emotional responses to violence, was left open. He wasn't just contemplating murder, he was trying to justify it. The prosecution built its case on a chain of evidence: cell tower data, surveillance footage, digital records, DNA, and behavioral analysis. Even without a confession, the puzzle fit. The defense argued that the investigation had tunnel vision, that Kohberger had been singled out too early, and everything afterward was molded to fit him.
He had ironically overcome a lot of obstacles: heroin addiction, poverty, being an outsider, being very overweight.
Kohberger remained composed throughout, quiet, neatly dressed. He looked more like an academic than a killer. Perhaps that's what made him all the more terrifying. While the legal process unfolded, Kaylee Goncalves' family spoke out. Her father addressed the press with tears in his voice and fire in his eyes. He promised not to rest until justice was served, until the death penalty was delivered. Families of the other victims stood behind him, sometimes quietly, sometimes through their grief. But they were united in one thing: none of them wanted compromise. The Kohberger case became emblematic of a new era of crime: intellectual, calculated, and cold-blooded. It raised unsettling questions about the line between studying evil and participating in it. He had lectured about the motivations of killers and became one himself. He spoke about the predictability of behavior and became predictable. He studied how to avoid detection and left traces in nearly every corner of the digital world. In the spring of 2024, prosecutors formally announced their intent to seek the death penalty. Their reasoning was direct: the brutal killing of 4 sleeping college students, the lack of remorse, the overwhelming public impact. This was not a case that could end softly.
This investigation, one of the most complex and high-profile cases in our state's history, was made possible by an extraordinary level of collaboration.
In July 2025, the most critical phase began: the trial. The criminal trial of Bryan Kohberger began in the summer of 2025. Nearly 2.5 years had passed, filled with legal motions, forensic reviews, and defense efforts to suppress evidence.
Is Mr. Kohberger prepared to plead to these charges? We will examine in a second. Because Mr. Kohberger is standing silent, I'm going to enter not guilty pleas.
The prosecution stood firm. 4 counts of first-degree murder, carried out with exceptional cruelty, premeditation, and full awareness. The trial took place in Lata County, Idaho. Nearly 100 people were screened for the jury pool. The courtroom was never empty. Public spectators and journalists filled the seats every day. Each hearing made headlines. Every glance from the defendant was dissected. People followed every gesture, every word. To some, Kohberger was a cold-blooded murderer. To others, he was an empty vessel void of soul, emotion, or regret. The prosecution presented a case with surgical precision. At the center, digital footprints. Kohberger's cell phone had been turned off during the time of the murder, turned back on while he was already on the road back to Pullman. Cell tower data placed him near the victim's house multiple times in the months leading up to the killings. Surveillance footage captured a white Hyundai Elantra driving past the house several times that night. His route was recorded, reconstructed, and confirmed from the university campus to King Road, and then down Highway 95 toward Washington State. Special attention was given to the knife sheath found at the crime scene. Forensic experts identified DNA on it that belonged to a man genetically related to Bryan Kohberger. After comparing the profile with DNA collected from his parents' trash, the match was near certain. The defense tried to dispute the connection, hinting at possible evidence tampering, but failed to provide any credible proof. Photographs of items seized from Kohberger's residence were shown in court: disposable gloves, black face masks, knife sheaths, and a laptop with saved articles about criminology and serial killers. His search history included queries about decomposition timelines, how to avoid leaving forensic traces, and most chilling news reports on the Idaho investigation, viewed while he was already under surveillance. The prosecution argued this wasn't just a crime, it was a calculated hunt. Kohberger wasn't in a psychotic break. He wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. He stalked his victims. He selected them. He waited. And when the time came, he knew who was sleeping in which room, how the house was laid out, and where to strike first. Every detail pointed to premeditation. The defense strategy aimed to break that narrative. They claimed there were alternative explanations for each piece of evidence. The phone could have been off for unrelated reasons. The car seen on camera maybe not his. The DNA on the sheath possibly transferred accidentally. They emphasized that no eyewitness ever saw the attacker. The murder weapon was never recovered, and Kohberger never confessed. The defense wasn't necessarily trying to prove innocence. They were trying to plant doubt, enough to fracture the prosecution's airtight story. At one point, prosecutors unveiled a digital map showing Kohberger's movements over the 2 months prior to the murders. His car and phone appeared near the victim's home at least 12 times, mostly late at night. These weren't routine trips. He didn't know the victims personally. He never visited as a guest. He was watching. Audio recordings were also played in court. After the murders, Kohberger never mentioned the events in Idaho to anyone. Those who knew him said he became even more withdrawn. He continued teaching, pretending everything was normal, while growing visibly anxious. He followed news reports and discussed the case in academic terms. That duality only deepened the sense of unease, if he were inside an experiment of his own design. The victim's parents attended every hearing. Faces twisted in grief served as a constant reminder that behind the evidence were real lives. Madison's mother wept when photos were shown. Kaylee's father stared at the defendant without looking away. A heavy silence hung over the courtroom, as if any breath could tip the balance between truth and horror. By mid-July 2025, after weeks of testimony, the trial reached its final stage. Prosecutors demanded the death penalty, citing the nature of the crime, exceptional brutality, multiple victims, a threat to public safety. This was one of those rare cases where acquittal seemed unfathomable and a guilty verdict felt inevitable. Kohberger remained silent. His face showed no emotion. His demeanor was calm, as though he had already accepted the outcome. He made no statements, asked for no forgiveness, showed no remorse. He simply waited, and the nation waited with him. The trial remains ongoing. The sentencing phase and final ruling on the death penalty are expected by the end of 2025. But for the victims' families, no sentence will bring back what was lost. They are left with questions that have no answers. Why these children? Why like this? Why at all? This case has become a symbol of pain, hidden behind closed doors, a monument to how one person, consumed by darkness, can destroy entire worlds. This is not just a story about a crime. It is a story about the void that follows. More than 2.5 years have passed since the bodies of 4 young students were discovered on King Road. The trial of Bryan Kohberger still hasn't reached its final chapter. The jury continues its deliberations. The prosecution prepares for the sentencing phase, but for the families, the mere existence of a trial has already become the climax of a nightmare from which there is no waking. On the evening of the final hearing, Zana's mother stood before reporters. She held a photograph of her daughter, taken just days before the murders. Zana's smile was bright, genuine, full of life. Each family has dozens of photos like that now, part of memorials, framed and frozen forever. Ethan, Kaylee, Madison, Zana, their names are etched into modern American memory as symbols of innocent lives stolen by an evil that offered no justification, no motive, and no remorse. Prosecutors are convinced this was not an impulsive act. It wasn't driven by rage or revenge. It was premeditated by someone who believed he was smarter than everyone else. He studied how to avoid getting caught, built mental simulations, analyzed behavior, and still he slipped. He left a trace. One tiny strand of DNA on a knife sheath unraveled everything. Kohberger's defense continues to argue procedural errors, investigative bias, and misinterpretation of evidence. They're preparing appeals and filing new motions. But the picture presented to the jury was cohesive, too logical, too seamless to be coincidence. He was there. He knew what he was doing, and he left, believing the world would never know. Bryan Kohberger has never admitted guilt. He has made no public statement, granted no interviews, shown no remorse.
If it were up to the president, he would have forced this monster to publicly explain why he chose to steal these innocent souls.
In jail, he is held in isolation under constant surveillance. He reads, writes, and prepares for the next phase of the trial. His name is now permanently tied to what happened on King Road, and not even he can erase that mark from history. For the small town of Moscow, everything has changed. In 2023, the house where it all happened was purchased by the university and demolished. In its place, an empty lot, some grass, and a wooden fence. Students walk by without looking. It's like a scar covered by skin, still throbbing underneath. Life has resumed. The university breathes again. But the fear now lives deeper.
Sentence will ensure that this evil will never again terrorize a family as he did ours and 3 others. Trial would have involved risks.
For the parents, the wound will never heal. They keep fighting for justice, for memory, for the hope that this never happens again. They receive letters, see monuments built, scholarships named in honor of their children.
It's almost been 3 years, and today's the end of a long, hard-fought battle.
But no justice will bring back what was taken. No verdict will bring sleep. No sentence will return the voice of a child who is no longer here. This is a story of how darkness can enter, where it's least expected, where life is just beginning, where graduation photos hang on the walls, and phones are full of plans. It is not just a story of a crime, but of the emptiness that follows, of the fear that lives in those who survived, of the silence now filling the homes where laughter once echoed. The killer's name is known. His case will be studied, his biography dissected. But what truly matters are not his details, but the lives he took. Their light, their voices, their journey cut short in an instant. And now, whenever someone recalls the Idaho case, they remember not only the horror of that night, but how fragile safety can be, how silently evil can arrive, and how important it is to remember not the killer, but those whose lives were stolen forever.